An old couple, Irene and Franklin, have shared a joyful marriage for nearly 5 decades. One evening, Franklin notices Irene barely touching her food and grows concerned about her health. She brushes off his worries and instead asks to go stargazing. Together, they head to their shed, shifting old belongings aside to reveal a concealed door. Beyond it lies a hidden tunnel, leading them to another locked entrance. As they step through, they are engulfed in an eerie glow and instantly transported to a breathtaking observation deck on an alien world. Overwhelmed, Franklin becomes nauseous, while Irene is mesmerized. Though Franklin insists on leaving, Irene wishes to linger. He reminds her that ever since her fall last year, she's wanted to visit this place more frequently. In fact, they've returned 865 times without ever uncovering its secrets. Frustrated, Franklin suggests they finally tell someone about the portal, but Irene believes it's their mystery to solve. Unbeknownst to them, their neighbor, Byron, watches from a distance. The next day, Franklin is annoyed to find Byron mowing their lawn, seeing it as an intrusion rather than a favor. Byron, however, is convinced the couple is hiding something in the shed. As he spies on them through his window, he notes Franklin's lie about his broken planter. His wife Janine dismisses his obsession, but Byron remains determined, especially since he plans to run for councilman. Meanwhile, Irene undergoes routine tests at the hospital. Her doctor, growing increasingly concerned, urges her to prioritize her health, warning that Franklin can't take care of her alone. Elsewhere, Franklin meets his granddaughter, Denise, for lunch. She's alarmed after a neighbor messaged her about the elderly couple's late-night outings. She suggests they move to a safer home, but Franklin refuses. After her tests, Irene visits a care home, catching up with an old friend suffering from severe memory loss. Taking a chance, she whispers the secret of the teleporter only for her friend to forget instantly. That evening, Franklin realizes he forgot to pick up Irene and rushes back to find her waiting alone. On their drive home, the truck sputters to a stop, another oversight, as Franklin forgot to refuel. Meanwhile, Byron seizes the opportunity to break into the shed. A sudden text from Janine startles him, making him drop his phone onto some light bulbs, forcing him to flee before he can investigate further. Later that night, Irene tells Franklin that after she's gone, he should sell the house and continue living. As he drifts off to sleep, she pens a letter apologizing for what she's about to do. She refuses to wait any longer. Slipping into the tunnel, she heads to the observation deck, ready to open the last door and step into the unknown. Just as she's about to cross the threshold, a ragged figure appears, gasping for help. By morning, Franklin discovers Irene crawling weakly in the garden. She tells him about the stranger, prompting Franklin to grab a hammer and investigate. Deep in the tunnel, he stumbles upon the man, barely conscious. When Franklin tries to move him, his hands come away stained with blood. They bring the stranger inside, but strangely, there are no visible wounds. Franklin, skeptical, assumes he's a lost junkie, but Irene insists she found him at the observation deck. Ignoring her, Franklin picks up the phone and calls the police. Overwhelmed, Irene convinces Franklin that the stranger is part of the larger mystery they've been chasing. Rather than turning him in, they decide to hide him upstairs. When Officer Thomas arrives, Franklin claims the intruder fled. With that, Thomas leaves without pressing further. Meanwhile, in Argentina, Tony finishes dinner with her mother, Estella, and pretends to go to bed. Instead, she sneaks out through the window to meet a classmate. As they talk, she points out her house, but the boy is more interested in the old chapel beside it. They sit together, and Tony leans in for a kiss, only for him to recoil, admitting he's only there on a dare. Rumors swirl that her grandfather was part of a cult, and the house is said to be haunted. Before they can continue, Estella catches them and sends them away. Once alone, Estella opens a hidden passage in the chapel, revealing a secret corridor that leads to a teleporter similar to Franklin's. She removes a tile from the wall and checks on a mysterious glowing artifact. The next morning, Tony is nowhere to be found. Estella drives around until she spots her trying to run away. After bringing her back, they stop for breakfast at a cafe. Tony complains about her isolation and her struggle to make friends. Estella sympathizes, acknowledging that living in such a remote place is difficult. However, she reminds Tony of her responsibility. The chapel must be protected, and one day, that duty will pass to her. Their conversation is cut short when Estella's phone alerts her to an intruder at their home. Meanwhile, Franklin and Irene search the stranger's belongings and uncover a book, an unusual tablet, and several gold coins. Their investigation is interrupted by a noise the man is struggling to get out of bed. As they rush to stop him, they realize he's burning with fever. Irene immediately recognizes the symptoms, recalling an illness she once had. However, they no longer have the necessary medication, prompting Franklin to head to the pharmacy. At the pharmacy, the clerk insists that the doctor must authorize the purchase. When the doctor gets on the phone, he shares grim news about Irene's condition. Distraught, Franklin leaves, only to be approached by Byron, who pushes for his support in his upcoming campaign. Later, Janine informs Byron that the police had visited their neighbors, fueling his suspicions. At home, Irene finds a photograph tucked inside the stranger's book. It shows him holding a baby, with the name Gabriel written underneath. As the man coughs violently, Irene brews a special herbal remedy and reads from his book to comfort him. Eventually, he regains consciousness and introduces himself as Jude. His memory is hazy. He recalls cold mountains, heavy rain, and then falling before everything went black. The next thing he knew, someone was carrying him. When Franklin returns home, he confronts Irene about her health. To reassure him, she eats more and promises to follow the doctor's instructions on the condition that Franklin supports her search for answers. They agree, feed Jude, and lock his room before going to bed. Later that night, Jude quietly picks the lock and sneaks downstairs and retreats to the bathroom. There, he carefully extracts a small, glowing object from his leg and crushes it. After disposing of the remains in the sink, he vanishes into the night. The following morning, Cornelius tells Estella that Tony must receive something called Perdisco, as she is next in line. Estella refuses, but Cornelius remains firm. He then gives her a critical task. She must locate the missing son of someone of great importance. Cornelius warns Estella that if she refuses to comply, she must bring Tony along, otherwise he will take the girl himself. After he leaves, Tony, puzzled, asks what a Perdesco is. Estella explains that it's a rite of passage and instructs her to pack a bag for a trip. Leading Tony into the hidden corridor beneath the chapel, Estella activates a concealed panel and selects their destination. Moments later, they step into the teleporter and emerge seconds later in the United States. Meanwhile, Franklin visits a pawn shop to appraise the mysterious coins. The trader identifies them as 18th century Spanish doubloons, but is unable to determine their origin. Back home, the lights flicker erratically. Concerned, Franklin and Irene check on Jude, who remains in his room. After taking him to breakfast, Jude suddenly becomes nauseous and vomits in the car. Later, while changing into fresh clothes left by Irene, Jude experiences a sudden flashback. He recalls being chased and attacked by another man. Hoping to discreetly remove him from their lives, Franklin takes Jude into town under the pretense of running errands. Instead, he stops at a bus station and offers him $5,000 to leave. Just as Jude is about to board, Franklin hesitates and changes his mind, bringing him back home. While they're out, Irene searches Jude's room and discovers a jar containing a strange, glowing orb. She places it on a table, only to watch in shock as it vanishes, leaving behind only the objects that had been resting on top of it. At that moment, Denise arrives for a visit. Panicked, Irene quickly hides the jar. When Franklin and Jude return, Irene introduces Jude as their new caretaker. Though she accepts the explanation, Denise remains skeptical. After dinner, instead of returning home, she decides to stay with a friend in town. That evening, Irene shares a painful memory. With Jude, her son took his own life when Denise was just 5. In turn, Jude confesses that the man in the photograph is his father, Gabriel, who abandoned him as a child. He believes he was sent here to find him, and Irene, moved by his story, vows to help. Meanwhile, Franklin discovers a blood-stained knife in the bathroom. When he turns on the sink faucet, fragments of the strange object Jude had destroyed rise to the surface, only to be swiftly washed away before he can examine them. Elsewhere, Byron is busy hanging up more campaign posters when he receives a call from the election committee. They've uncovered his forged signatures, leaving him with 2 choices: drop out of the race or face legal consequences. That night, angered and desperate, he breaks into Franklin's shed once more. This time, he finds the secret door, follows the corridor, and stumbles upon the teleporter. The next morning, Jude buries the jar with the glowing sphere in the garden. But his actions don't go unnoticed. Baron spots him and starts prying for answers. Jude brushes him off, claiming he's merely the caretaker, and walks away. Later, as Jude drinks his coffee, Franklin secretly takes his mug and brings it to Officer Thomas, asking him to run fingerprint tests. He also recounts what he saw in the bathroom, but Thomas dismisses his claims as delusions. He reminds Franklin that Irene had already expressed concerns about his mental state. Meanwhile, Irene and Jude visit the library, seeking help identifying the man in the photograph. The librarian manages to find a match. Gabriel was arrested years ago and reportedly suffered from amnesia. When they return home, Franklin confronts Irene about lying to Officer Thomas. He warns her that Jude is not a substitute for their lost son, but Irene refuses to listen. Frustrated, Franklin storms out for a drive and spots Byron burning all of his campaign posters. Back in Argentina, Estella and Tony meet with their contact, Nick. He leads them into an old warehouse, where a machine analyzes data to narrow down their search area. Despite its calculations, the target area remains vast, requiring Nick's help. He loads them into his high-tech van, designed to pinpoint the signal with greater accuracy. As they travel, Tony notices a chest filled with firearms, hinting at the danger ahead. At the care home, Chandra is fired for stealing from patients. Seeking a new opportunity, she visits Irene, hoping to land a caretaker position. Disappointed to learn that Jude has already taken the job, she leaves her business card before departing. Before leaving, she pretends to use the restroom, but secretly searches for something to steal. Later, while Irene is showering, she asks Jude to answer the ringing phone. It's the pawnshop clerk, who has found a buyer for the coins. Jude, pretending to be Franklin's son, takes down the buyer's contact information. When he calls, he asks for Gabriel, but the person on the other end insists he has the wrong number. However, the man also says a few words in Latin words that match what Cornelius once told Estella. Spooked, Jude quickly hangs up and lies to Irene, claiming it was just a telemarketer. Before heading to bed, Irene gives Jude some money as a token of appreciation for his hard work. Later, he realizes his tablet is missing and immediately suspects Chandra. Grabbing her business card, he sets out to find her, but he gets lost and stops at a bar to ask for directions. Coincidentally, Denise is also there with a friend, and they end up hanging out. Jude enjoys himself so much that he agrees to do karaoke only to sing a slow song in Latin. The performance earns him confused stares from the crowd. When Denise gets distracted, he quietly slips out of the bar. Meanwhile, Franklin is playing pool alone when Byron arrives and accuses him of reporting the forged signatures. Franklin denies it, and instead of arguing, they start playing a game. As they drink, they open up about their marriages. Franklin confesses that he isn't sure if Irene still loves him, while Byron shares that his wife Janine was widowed before they met, making him feel like he was always just a second choice. As the night goes on, Byron drunkenly reveals that he found the secret room in Franklin's shed. To his surprise, Franklin doesn't deny it and instead offers to show him more. In the middle of the night, Irene wakes up and realizes that both Franklin and Jude are still missing. Worried, she gets into her old car and goes out to search for them. Meanwhile, Franklin and Byron return home and immediately enter the teleporter. When nothing happens, Byron jumps to the conclusion that Franklin's secret room is nothing more than a strange, underground dungeon. Elsewhere, Jude is walking down the road when he spots a police car. Panicking, he tries to run, but the officer catches up and grabs him. The physical struggle triggers a buried memory. Jude recalls stabbing a man multiple times, which explains the bloodstains that had been on his clothes. The officer arrests him just as Irene drives past the area. At the station, Irene confronts Jude about running away and demands the truth. He finally opens up his entire life was spent in an isolated compound, protecting an ancient doorway of unknown origin. There are many such doorways, but no one knows who built them or why they exist. The strange world on the other side, the one Irene glimpsed, is nothing but a desolate wasteland. The man he killed was a guard who tried to prevent his escape, and if the people from his organization ever find him, they will kill him too. He believes his father, Gabriel, disappeared through one of the doors, and that's why he has been searching for him. Moved by his story, Irene persuades the officer to let Jude go. Meanwhile, Estella's group reaches a transmission tower. Nick climbs it to hack into the system, while Tony tries to take a picture, only for Estella to forbid her from posting anything online. As Nick picks up a signal, a utility worker arrives, forcing Estella to quickly knock him out and lock him inside his van. With the situation handled, they leave, and Nick announces that their next destination is Illinois. A few hours into the journey, Estella asks Nick to take an alternate route and stop near a forest. She wanders through the trees, recalling a past mission with her father. As a child, she had been told to stay in the car and monitor the radar, but curiosity led her to follow him. She witnessed him fighting with a teenage girl who resisted capture. The girl managed to stab him and run, but he shot her down. Together, they disposed of her body in a lake, and that day, her father taught her that this was their duty. Back in the van, Nick teaches Tony how to shoot a gun and inadvertently reveals that he knew her father, someone she knows nothing about. The next morning, Franklin takes Irene to a doctor, who is pleased to see she's doing much better. Meanwhile, Denise visits the house again and questions Jude about the photograph in the book. He casually claims that his family was in a cult, which she assumes is a joke. Upon returning home, Franklin retrieves an old camera and gives it to Byron, instructing him to develop the photos to uncover the truth. Later, Irene distracts Chandra while Jude sneaks into her place to retrieve his missing tablet. While searching, he also discovers a necklace containing the same kind of capsule he once had implanted in his leg. Alarmed, he confronts Chandra and an argument breaks out. In the heat of the moment, Jude exposes the stash of stolen items she has taken from patients. Irene offers to keep quiet if Chandra tells them where she got the necklace. After they leave, Jude explains that his tablet is actually a key, and the capsules function as trackers, hence why he removed his. He believes the necklace once belonged to his father. Meanwhile, Byron gets the developed photos and sees an image of Franklin and Irene inside what appears to be an observation deck. Intrigued, he researches online and stumbles upon countless conspiracy theories. Eventually, he finds one about the impossible door, a piece of artwork created by an Argentine missionary in 1723. Back home, Franklin discovers that someone has entered the shed and tampered with the secret door. He finds Byron working on the teleporter, trying to activate it, but so far, it hasn't worked. Then, Franklin notices bloody fingerprints near the doorway. Pulling aside a panel, he uncovers a hidden control system like Estella's version. This one is missing its power source. He suspects Jude may have it. Meanwhile, Byron notices floating leaves and digs into the ground, eventually uncovering the missing orb. That night, while taking out the trash, Franklin finds an old letter from Irene, devastated by its contents. He returns inside and bitterly tells Jude that everything was fine until he arrived. His presence is tearing them apart. Jude simply asks if he's certain. Unable to respond, Franklin storms out and spends the night at Byron's house. Elsewhere, Estella's team reaches Illinois and checks into a motel. While buying snacks from a vending machine, Estella hears unusual noises coming from Nick's room. Peeking inside, she discovers him using an orb to perform tricks for a night worker. Furious, she pays the woman to leave and scolds Nick for his reckless behavior, reminding him that his brother died due to a similar mistake. Nick fires back, accusing Estella of hypocrisy. After all, she's keeping Tony in the dark about everything. The next morning, during breakfast, Nick brings up Estella's wild teenage years and provocatively suggests that Tony resembles his late brother. Enraged, Estella slams his face into the table. Dragging Tony away, she leaves without Nick, explaining that their target is part of their organization and must be stopped before he endangers others. Tony, finally understanding the stakes, agrees to help track him down using Nick's equipment. Meanwhile, Jude and Denise meet with the previous owner of the necklace, as Chandra had directed them. The man shares a story. His father, a truck driver, once picked up a hitchhiker who seemed to be running from something. When the driver realized they were being followed, the hitchhiker panicked, used a knife to cut a tracker out of his ankle, handed it to the driver, and then vanished. At the same time, Byron shows Franklin the recovered orb, but Franklin is too preoccupied to care. Instead, he confronts Irene about the letter. Though she apologizes and insists it was a mistake, Franklin believes their marriage is beyond repair. Back in the shed, Byron places the orb in the control panel, but nothing happens. Meanwhile, at the police station, Officer Thomas learns about Jude's recent arrest. Suspicious, he runs a background check and finds a history of violent incidents and psychiatric holds. He visits Irene and insists on taking Jude into custody. To protect him, she pretends to have already fired him. Moments later, Jude and Denise return with new information about his father's last known location. Determined to follow his trail, Irene and Denise agree to join him, while Franklin chooses to stay behind. Upon arrival, they meet Hannah, who shares that she was once in a relationship with Gabriel, but he disappeared without a trace, 15 years ago. Learning how far the group had traveled, she offers them a place to stay for the night. Irene tries calling Franklin, but he doesn't pick up, so she leaves a message. Throughout the evening, she hears strange noises, but Hannah insists it's just the wind. Unbeknownst to the guests, Hannah sneaks into a concealed room where Paul is monitoring them through hidden cameras. He tracks Irene's call and confirms that the number matches the one linked to the coin seller, revealing that Paul himself was the mysterious buyer. Later, Hannah sets up a room for Jude in what used to be Gabriel's space, and he's startled to find the same book he had been reading elsewhere. The margins are filled with notes, and inside, he discovers a slip of paper marked with runes. Meanwhile, in another room, Irene expresses remorse to Denise over her father's death, blaming herself. A flashback shows that Irene's son had battled deep depression, yet she pressured him to support his family, ultimately pushing him over the edge. At dawn, the group departs, unaware that Paul has begun tailing them in his car. Meanwhile, Franklin and Byron finalize the construction of the spacesuits and make their way to the observation deck. However, Franklin chooses to remain inside, wanting to share this milestone with Irene. Byron steps out alone, marveling at the experience as he narrates over the radio. Franklin warns him not to wander too far, but Byron insists he sees what looks like furniture in the distance before disappearing from view. Communication cuts off, and Franklin fears the worst. When the family returns home, he assures them everything is fine, but guilt visibly weighs on him. That night, Jude confesses that he swiped the book from Hannah's house. Using its annotations and his tablet, he attempts to decode the message within. Meanwhile, Irene leads Denise to the teleporter, revealing that she discovered it after her son's death and always felt it was connected to him. She describes the barren world beyond and how she found Jude there. Shocked and upset by all the secrecy, Denise storms off. The next morning, Jude searches for the orb, only to find an empty hole where it once rested. Franklin revisits the observation deck, hoping to hear from Byron, but the radio remains silent. On his way back, Janine approaches, asking if Franklin has seen her husband. Franklin feigns ignorance. Later, Jude confronts Irene and Franklin about the missing orb, warning them of the potential dangers. He also declares his intent to leave soon to follow the clues leading to his father. Franklin asks about the world beyond the portal, and Jude confirms it's nothing more than a desolate wasteland. Elsewhere, Cornelius steps out of the van for a break and notices a disturbing number of dead birds in the area. Inside, Estella tells Tony that once they find Jude, she will have to eliminate him, and if she refuses, the organization will take Tony away. Their tense conversation is interrupted when Cornelius spots Jude driving off in a car. Estella pursues him while Cornelius and Tony remain behind to keep an eye on the house. As they hide in the woods, Cornelius reveals that Nick's late brother was actually Tony's father and promises to introduce her to him when this is over. Moments later, Tony approaches the house, where Franklin greets her only for Cornelius to ambush him at gunpoint. Meanwhile, Jude meets with Denise, trying to convince her he never meant to deceive her. Before they can talk further, Estella arrives and starts shooting. The pair takes cover behind a car. Jude urges Denise to return to her grandparents' house for safety, then sprints into the woods, luring Estella away. Denise drives back, only to find her grandparents held hostage by Cornelius. He threatens Denise's life until Irene reveals that the teleporter is hidden in the shed. Satisfied, Cornelius hands the gun to Tony and orders her to keep the family under control, while he searches for the device. As soon as Cornelius is gone, Irene attempts to reason with Tony. Hesitant at first, Tony finally decides to act, reaching for a knife to free them. However, Cornelius returns just in time to stop her. As tensions rise, Denise discreetly works on loosening Franklin's restraints with her keys. Meanwhile, Cornelius contacts Estella with a new plan. She loudly announces that the family is being held hostage, forcing Jude to surrender himself to protect them. As Estella drags him toward the van, Jude recognizes her from his past. He remembers seeing her kneeling before his mother during a significant ritual. Once they arrive at the house, Cornelius strikes Jude with his gun and claims that she sent him. Jude doesn't believe him, leading Cornelius to kick him while blaming him for endangering the family. Estella is ordered to kill him, but she hesitates. Frustrated, Cornelius prepares to do it himself, only for Franklin to lunge at him. However, Cornelius easily overpowers Franklin and knocks him aside. Then, he turns his weapon on Estella, ready to eliminate her for her betrayal. Before he can act, Jude tackles him, giving Franklin the opportunity to strike Cornelius down with Irene's cane. Seizing control, Estella grabs the gun and declares an end to the violence before subduing Cornelius with a taser. They gag and bind Cornelius, throwing him into the van. Estella announces she and Tony will flee far away. confident that no one will pursue them now that Cornelius is their bargaining chip. However, as they drive off, another vehicle suddenly rams into them from behind. Estella tries to speed up, but the relentless attacker swerves, forcing them off the road. The van tumbles down a hill, finally coming to a halt at the bottom. A group of men quickly surrounds them, taking them into custody, while Hannah and Paul greet Cornelius. Back at the house, Denise tells Jude she's going with him. They enter the shed, where Jude places his tablet on the control panel, revealing it to be a keyboard. This allows them to select their destination. Jude inputs the coordinates he found in the book's note, explaining that the location resets after every use. After exchanging heartfelt goodbyes, they vanish through the teleporter and reappear inside a sleek, high-tech building in Bangkok. Meanwhile, Franklin finally confesses to Irene about Byron and the spacesuits. He believes Janine deserves closure and decides to search for Byron. Irene reassures him with a few loving words before letting him go. Stepping outside, Franklin is shocked to find their coffee table. As he continues walking, his radio connection weakens. Eventually, he stumbles upon a lifeless body with a knife in its chest, unaware that it's the man Jude killed. Suddenly, his suit's oxygen supply begins running dangerously low. Struggling to breathe, he manages to send a distress call to Irene before collapsing. Just as he thinks it's the end, Irene arrives and removes his helmet, revealing that the air is completely breathable. To Franklin's astonishment, there's more than just a wasteland. There's an entire city in the distance.